Our top story, the cost of the HS2 rail scheme will be at least £80 billion, double the current government estimate. Well, that's according to a report which is going to be officially published tomorrow from the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a right-leaning free market think tank. Well, it says the project, a high-speed rail link from London to the north of England, should be cancelled. No one from the Department of Transport is available for interview this morning, but we can talk to the author of this report, Dr. Richard Wellings. Good morning, Mr. Wellings.
Good morning.
Dr. Wellings, I beg your pardon.
Don't worry.
Thank you for joining us this morning, and obviously you've put a lot of work into this report, so you've got a lot to say, I'm sure, on it. But where is the evidence, first of all, that the cost is going to rise so dramatically?
Well, we identified three major risks, basically, that could increase the cost to taxpayers. The first is that, as the general election approaches, and particularly if it's looking close, that the government will be tempted into, if you like, buying off opposition along the route by putting more of the HS2 into tunnels. And we've already seen this process in West London and the Chilterns, but this could develop along more parts of the route, which would increase costs and risks, possibly some route diversions as well, as we've seen in Sheffield recently. Then the second major risk is that local councils and transport bureaucracies along the route are going to use H2 as an excuse to lobby for their pet public transport projects, tram schemes, rail schemes and so on. And this could potentially add billions, even tens of billions to the cost as well. And finally, there's all the regeneration that will be needed around the HS2 stations. And a lot of these are brownfield sites where existing businesses and homeowners will have to be relocated, possibly a lot of land reclamation, which is hugely expensive, as we saw at the Millennium Dome and the Olympic site. So all these things will add up and potentially add to the cost of taxpayers by, it could even be more than 30 billion. It could be 40 or 50 extra.
But a lot of these are knock-on effects, aren't they? And local issues, as you say. Will that not be coming out of local pots? Are you adding all this up and saying that it's basically going to be a government overspend?
That's right. I mean, basically, this money will come from central government, as it always does for those kinds of transport schemes, or at least the lion's share of it will. And I mean, the other issue we pointed to is that these will tend to be low-value schemes like high-speed tours as well, within the technical jargon, a low benefit-cost ratio. So the point is HS2 is going to distort the pattern of transport investment away from good projects and towards bad projects. And there's an even bigger cost from that because obviously infrastructure is so vital to the economy. So if this money was spent on good projects, then the returns would be an awful lot higher, probably by a factor of 3 or 4.
What should happen to the scheme now, in your opinion?
I think it should be cancelled. I think some of the money should be perhaps used to pay down government debt, and some of it's used on some of these high-value transport schemes that could deliver very, very much higher benefits. So that's the way to really get the maximum bang per buck for taxpayers.
Okay, so let's get stuck into this then, if that is your proposal. It's a negative way of looking at it, isn't it? I mean, the government say that this is absolutely vital for this country, providing a huge economic boost, which will generate a return on investment that will continue paying back for generations to come. So it's very easy to say this is going to be a lot of money and a waste of money, but how are we going to know, that the benefit will be seen in the long term, won't it?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a complete waste of money. Obviously, there will be some beneficiaries and some travellers will benefit, some particular local areas will benefit as well. The question is whether it's good value for money, and it clearly isn't. And it's not just me saying
hang
that.
How do you reach that judgment? It clearly isn't.
Well, I mean, it's not just me saying that.
We're not going to know, are we?
I mean, there have been numerous studies by independent economists showing that the business case for HS2 is deeply flawed. And we know the DfT have used various questionable assumptions. For example, the idea that business travellers can't work on the train, which is ridiculous in this day and age. Then there's factoring in competition from existing routes and new technology and so on. They've used very, very optimistic passenger forecasts. So all these together, bring down the returns enormously, and it means that it's unlikely it's actually going to return positive benefits at all. It's likely to actually lose money.
Do you really think that the existing routes, though, connecting the south and the north of England can cope in say 20 years' time? They're not going to be able to, are they?
Yeah, they can. I mean,
can they?
Yeah, they can. There's a localised problem south of Milton Keynes on the West Coast main line with overcrowding there. But it's been shown that can be solved at a tiny fraction of the cost of HS2. So the idea that we need to spend 50 billion and probably a lot more, as we suggest, to solve this quite localised problem is just ridiculous.
Do you use the train much?
Well, I use public transport in London a lot. I don't use the intercity train much these days, but I did used to use it very frequently.
So if you're travelling, up to, I don't know, London to Manchester, you had to do that, and the train was really busy. You maybe had to stand. You'd change your view, wouldn't you?
No, I don't think. I mean, the other issue is, the huge level of rail subsidies, and obviously that pumps up demand. So if it's properly measured, it's probably around £7 or £8 billion a year, including the increases in Network Rail's debt. So we're talking about a distorted market anyway. And in a sense, these subsidies are breeding more subsidies as people are subsidised to live further and further from their place of work. So there's also a problem there. And we think there could be more flexible pricing to get more capacity out of the existing lines and so on.
I mean, the construction of HS2 will involve increased economic activity, won't it? I mean, in the Midlands, in the North. So if it costs more, then that means more jobs, doesn't it? More money is being spent on construction businesses in these places.
No, that's the classic economic error. It's a misconception because, of course, that money is coming out of taxpayers' pockets. So instead of being spent by taxpayers on whatever they want to spend it on, it's being spent by the government on HS2. So, and they're also, this tax bill also creates wider losses in the economy as well as trade doesn't take place because it's too expensive for it to take place. So you actually end up losing money from doing that, as you do with all stuff that's financed by taxation.
Where's the Institute of Economic Affairs based?
It's in Westminster.
It's in Westminster.
Yes.
This is a very London-centric argument you're putting forward, isn't it?
Well, I'm a Northerner myself.
This is about connecting the country in a proper, fast, speedy, effective way.
Well, I'm a Northerner myself, but I don't think this is the best way to help the North. And I think, in terms of transport infrastructure, the main thing is to improve links between northern cities, particularly across the Pennines, where it's still a huge barrier. If you think the road links between Sheffield and Manchester are appalling, there's only really the M62 that's a decent link at the moment. Also, further north of the M62, not very good links as well, from Burnley over to Keighley and that sort of area. So I think that's the solution. And these alternative projects would have much better returns for the taxpayer.
When you go to other countries, and I've travelled around quite a lot in the last few years over the course of my job, and you go on a good public transport system, you go on a really good train or a really good underground or a metro system, you end up thinking to yourself, why can't we do this in the UK? This is an attempt to do it, isn't it? And I go back to the point that it's a bit negative, isn't it, to sort of put the kibosh on it before it's even begun.
Well, the problem is, people always look at the shiny new stations and the fast trains, particularly in countries like France and Germany and Japan, but they don't look at the wider economic costs. And of course, these high-speed rail programs have been hugely expensive. They've left massive debts. In Japan, I think it's a couple of $100 billion of debt that it was left behind from the high-speed rail program.
It'll make it back, though, won't it?
No, that's just been written off. Essentially, it's been piled onto taxpayers into Japan. They had to shunt it off onto taxpayers because it couldn't be put onto the rail company when they privatised it because it would have made it completely commercially, a dead duck. So, and rail subsidies in a lot of European countries are even higher than they are in this country. So clearly, there's a big economic cost, but we don't always see that.
Very interesting, Dr. Richard Wellings. Thanks for talking to us this morning. Well, let's speak to a couple of guests joining us to discuss this. Joe RUKIN is the campaigns manager for Stop HS2. Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Jonathan.
I don't think we need to set out your stance on this by the name of your organisation, but Emma Antrobus is policy manager at Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. Good morning to you, Emma.
Good morning.
So maybe we'll start with you. Let us know what you think about the HS2 project, and also, do you understand the concerns that have been raised there by Dr. Wellings?
Well, of course, we understand the concerns around costs, but I think it's indicative that this country has been so poor actually in investing in major transport infrastructure that actually we're not that good at estimating how much it's going to cost. And I think from what I understand, a lot of other costs are being lumped into this whole project that don't normally become associated with a transport funding project, i.e. things like regeneration and that kind of stuff. The point is that we're supportive of High Speed 2 because it's about connecting cities much better. It's about providing a 21st century railway. We've not built a north-south railway in over 100 years in this country, and we're lagging behind other countries.
Okay, Joe, isn't this the general point of this, that all investments, we're not going to know about the return of them until many years in the future, and this is an investment for the economic long term, isn't it?
Well, it's an investment that's going to keep going up and up in cost. Just a couple of months ago, the official cost of HS2 went up £10 billion when it was introduced in front of MPs, and none of them batted an eyelid. The thing is that it is going to cost far more than expected. Emma just said that it's about connecting cities much better. For example, the East Midlands station is in a place called Totton. It's nowhere near the centre of Nottingham, and apparently that's going to connect to Derby. Well, there's no plans of how it's going to connect to Derby. If you want to get to Derby, it's a cab or you take your bike on the train. Now, to say that actually connecting it in isn't in the cost of HS2 is absolutely ridiculous. And if you're going to have this network and you want to actually plumb it into the existing railway network, it's going to cost more money because you're putting a lot of these stations basically where there aren't any connections. Like Sheffield Meadowhall, there's a massive row in Sheffield about where they're going to put the stations. And of course there's going to be all these extra costs. And the reality is that the regeneration costs that local councils will want have to be put in this. But if you really want to regenerate, the regions of this country, just spend money on that. A train line isn't going to do it on its own. And that's what this report is highlighting.
So do you think the existing rail network would be able to cope in say, 20 years' time?
Well,
that's unrealistic, isn't it?
Oh, no, not at all. One of the things that the pro-lobbyists for HS2 will keep saying is that, the West Coast Main Line is going to run out of capacity in 20 years' time. Well, this is all based on a completely discredited modelling system, which is only being used for one purpose. Stop using it for everything else except trying to justify HS2. The reality is that you can deliver incremental benefits and deliver more capacity to more people more quickly for less money and deliver those benefits across the network.
Okay.
But they go on about capacity because everyone who's been on a train has been on a busy train. And so they think that HS2, it will stop people standing. No, it won't, because the West Coast Main Line is not where the problem is. And long distance intercity journeys are not what the majority of people take. Those are for the business elite, and it's a massive cost that we will be subsidising just the richest in society.
Okay, Emma Antrobus, and that's the problem, that in principle it's a splendid idea, and we'd love to have new shiny trains that connect the country really well, but with the evidence is that these major projects, the costs do spiral out of control, and in this day and age we just can't afford that, can we?
Well, you could say that we can't afford it, but actually can we afford not to do it? In the last few months, there have already been schemes to put direct trains out of Blackpool and Shrewsbury down to London that have not been allowed to go ahead because of capacity on the West Coast Main Line. It's not the whole of the West Coast Main Line, but it's certain key junctions, and they are already full. The capacity argument is a very strong one, because what we're talking about is being able to take off those point-to-point routes, and I accept the point around Totton Station, but actually for the west side, we have a line that was upgraded 10 years ago at a cost of almost £10 billion that is already full.
It wasn't upgrading, it was mostly maintenance. And that's I'm sorry, people keep saying that. 80% of the cost of the West Coast Main Line works was essential maintenance that hadn't been carried out for 40 years.
Let Emma respond to that.
Yes, a lot of it was maintenance, but the fact is that we have, for decades, not invested in our transport infrastructure, and the fact is that the rail network is creaking at the seams. We cannot do things like put double-decker trains on because of the Victorian infrastructure. Now, if we're going to build extra capacity, and clearly, we have issues around freight because of the accepted desire to take lots of lorries off roads and put it onto railways, then actually we need infrastructure that can cope with that.
Emma, what I wanted to put that point that Joe made about businessmen on the commute. I mean, this is another key point, isn't it? That isn't it just going to be for them essentially? And could it actually have the knock-on effect of, rather than sending people from London to regions, and you're based in Manchester, people will be more likely to go the other way? Couldn't it have a knock-on effect and actually work against the regions?
Well, I mean, currently Manchester already has a decent service into London. The point is that to make that service faster and more efficient, what they've done is take out a lot of the intermediary stops. And so by putting in a new line that will take out some of that point-to-point traffic, you free up the current line for more of those intermediary stops and for freight. Yes, we'll always see, that brain drain, if you like, down to London. But actually, by making the cities better connected, then there'll be no reason to actually say everything has to be in London. Right. The benefits of agglomeration actually show that, if transport connectivity is one of the key things to encourage economic growth.
Joe Rukin, a lot of this money is going to be spent, of course it is, but it's also going to be invested, isn't it? And things like the construction industry in the Midlands and in the north of England, you must welcome that.
Well, the thing is, you could deliver a lot more jobs a lot quicker for less money. And it's odd that you say that, because one of the things that hasn't been picked up on this report so far is that basically they're saying that the government has been sucked in by cities like Manchester with their lobbies from the council, from the Chamber of Commerce, and the construction industry. Oddly enough, all the people who are going to benefit from it, whether they're getting stations or they're going to get the money from building it, think it's a really good idea and have been lobbying for it. It's a real surprise, that, isn't it? Just to pick up a couple of points that Emma said. She said that she actually said quite rightly there are pinch points on the West Coast Main Line, and that's what we've been saying right from the start. Sort out these pinch points that will increase capacity exponentially. And the other thing with the Blackpool and Shrewsbury trains,
very quickly,
that basically Network Rail said that Virgin, because they run a train every 20 minutes to London, from London to Manchester and from London to Birmingham, are keeping the capacity artificially low, because you should be running a train every 3 minutes out of Euston. So basically, capacity is being kept low by the failure of privatisation. And just addressing things like this will increase capacity. And of course, HS2 is going to suck things to London.
Okay.
That's what's happened with every other high-speed rail network in the world. It sucks more stuff to the capital city.
We need to move on. Thank you, Joe Rukin and Emma Antrobus there.